In June of 1944, Americans and their allies launched the invasion of Normandy. They had come to liberate Europe from the Nazis. These men were soldiers then. For some, it's taken a lifetime of struggle to make peace with their wartime memories. Others are struggling still. They have returned now to trace their route from D-Day to the Rhine. This is the story of their memories. D-Day, June 6, 1944. It was the greatest sea invasion ever. Under the command of General Eisenhower, the official radio message read, Allied naval forces, supported by strong air forces, began landing Allied armies this morning on the northern coast of France. At dawn, as the Allied forces hit the beaches, the Germans were waiting. On one strip of sand, 2,500 Americans fell on that first day. We remember it as the Battle for Omaha Beach.
I was really very, very afraid. I want to scream, I want to cry. We see all the people was laying wounded and screaming and everything, and there's nothing you could do. We just see them floating in the water, and we just keep walking.
How old were you?
I was over 30 years old.
Weren't you too old to be here?
Oh, I didn't feel too old in those days because I knew we have to do something.
Did you have to lie about your age to get in?
Yeah, I did it.
You lied about
Yeah,
you told them you were younger than you were.
2 years younger.
Why? Did you do that?
Because I want to join the paratroopers.
Why?
So we can meet the enemy as soon as possible and get this thing over.
Get it over.
Yeah. So
You had 2 children at home. You had a 2-year-old and a...
That's the reason that they didn't take me when they are born. They found out I was married and had 2 kids, so they... he said, don't worry, they put me right in the infantry.
They wouldn't put you in the airborne because it was too dangerous, so they put you on Omaha Beach.
Omaha.
It was here on Omaha Beach that Jose Lopez, now 79 years old, from San Antonio, Texas, saw his first action. He fought his way across Europe with a water-cooled machine gun, rising to the rank of sergeant. It was on a field in Belgium where he received his nation's highest honor for gallantry in action, the Congressional Medal of Honor. Why do these men keep coming back, these veterans?
I think basically it's that we went through a crucible here. This was a really critical moment in their lives, and nothing they've done before or since, I think, stands out in their memory the way what happened to them here it does. Order, arms. You know, you read your strategy and you read your tactics and you study them, but it comes right down to it, it's guys dying.
Charles MacDonald was a young captain and a company commander. He later became one of the Army's official historians. Today, he returns often to these old battlefields and to places like the American Cemetery at Omaha Beach.
We didn't spend every waking moment thinking, my God, today I may die. We knew we were facing the possibility of death, but we certainly weren't expecting it. Remember, we were young. I was 21, 22 years old. You don't die at 21 and 22. And we just didn't feel we were going to be killed.
What do you think when you look around at all these crosses?
Bill, it's so touching until I try not to think, really. I know my first time here, I really became filled with tears. And now I just try not to think too deeply, or else I really get so sad.
Sad?
Sad, absolutely sad. Admiring of them, of course, and what they gave for their country. But basically sadness.
Charles, do you still think of the particular men who died? Men who died under you, fought with you?
Yes, yes, I do, Bill. And I was shocked not too long ago. I have a friend who lives in Belgium who sent me a picture of the cross of one of my lieutenants. And it, sorry, I don't mean to get weepy on this, but it really was an emotional shock when I saw that.
Because the name was there?
It was my soldier, and he had died under my command.
Never forget that, do you?
Never forget it.
One thing I didn't like too well, but they had a purpose for it, is when it got dark, the command came down to put a white thing across your back, each man. White cloth like that. And as the others kept coming in, that was a signal that you're the American. But to me, it was kind of a signal I'm a target too, you know? Yeah. Okay.
Clarence Chouinard from Anoka, Minnesota, hasn't been back to Utah Beach since D-Day. Now he returns to relive it with his daughter, Judy.
Did you ever talk to her about what happened here?
No,
never did. He never
I
discussed
didn't.
it
There was no...
in 35 years. You
never discussed it?
Never discussed it.
With all that firing and all that those guns going off and the bullets landing around, why does a man fight? What keeps you from running away?
How can you run away from a cyclone? Does that make any sense?
No.
Oh. Well, where are you going to run? Is it going to be any better to where you run? Maybe it's going to be worse. And of course, if you did run, it wouldn't tell much of you, would it? Yeah, it wouldn't say much about you. What if everybody ran?
All right, here we go.
You remember the first day somebody shot at you?
Yes, day one. Oh, sure, yeah. It was day one that I thought they were shooting particularly at me, yeah.
Paul Marable lives in Waco, Texas. He landed at Utah Beach as a second lieutenant with the 90th Infantry Division.
The first absurdity of the whole war for me occurred right here on this beach. While I was out here counting our people in from our battalion, our artillery battalion, a fella came up behind me, and while I was busy making my notes, he says, "Do you know how I could get back to England?" And I thought, well, a lot of people would like to do that. And I turned around, and this was an Air Force, or an Army Air Corps pilot, as we called it, Army Air Corps in those days, and he was in his dress uniform.
Out here?
Green blouse, as we called it, the tunic, and ice cream or pink pants, and low-quarter, highly polished shoes. and so I just had to ask him, what in the world are you doing out here like that? He had known that he would have only one mission to fly that day because he had been flying missions apparently fairly continually, and he was told this would be it. And so he had a heavy date in England, and he thought he'd just outfit himself for the date, put on some coveralls, fly his mission, get back, rip off his coveralls, and go on his date. There he was in Class A uniform. His plane had been hit. He had to bail out. He come down the parachute, And there he was, all ready for his date.
Wonder if he got back.
Well, I directed him to one of the landing craft that was then being used to evacuate wounded. They were just loaded up with on stretchers with wounded. And so I suppose he did, yeah.
The 4th Armored Division had driven all the way across France after the breakout from Normandy, with the armor driving up this road, Combat Command B, and off on side roads to the left, Combat Command A, and on the right, the 26th Infantry Division in very rough terrain.
This is settled in Luxembourg, where we stayed, and the fellow on your left there, I used to get a bang out of him. You notice that mustache he has?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we didn't have glass mirrors, and I suppose due to the reflection, we'd had a piece of tin. And oftentimes I've seen that guy in the wood with that little piece of tin on that tree. Spend a half hour on that one damn little mustache. Yeah. Felt like you had to go up and help him.
Was it you had a hospital set up in a schoolhouse?
Yeah, right on the field where they were wounded, there were 8 men. But back in the schoolhouse was the first doctor, which is called a battalion surgeon.
And that was you?
Yeah, that was me.
And other doctors or just you?
Just me.
The trouble with Patton was he didn't really want us in foxholes much. He wanted us to just keep going and going until you either captured it, you got wounded, or you were killed. And of course, Patton, he said, when you're wounded, you don't just give up, you keep shooting. He meant it. If you were conscious, you shot until somebody came and put you out of your misery. And of course, he was brutal in some respects. He was about the only general that said, we're here to kill these guys and kill them as fast as we can and no messing around.
The Battle of the Hedgerows is on again. This is the beginning of the drive that chased the enemy out of the entire Cotentin Peninsula and placed the Yanks on the Brittany border.
The Norman hedgerows, ancient thick walls of vegetation and dirt. Concealed behind them, the enemy put up fierce resistance at close range. Many a soldier lost his life on a field surrounded by hedgerows.
This is it?
This is the hill. I wound up at the crest of the hill overlooking the roadway, helping a sergeant with a machine gun. And that's where I was when we had our big trouble.
Big trouble?
Yes.
What was the big trouble?
Well, a tank came around from that side of the hill, right on the roadway, blasted the Jeep of our artillery liaison officer, and
Where was the tank?
it came around from that side and parked right there under our position, to where I can still hear the gears in that turret turning, and that elevated that gun and shot right into the face of this cliff. The front of the L trench jumped at us, but the sergeant, he got to his feet with his rifle and started shooting down on the tank. I don't know whether he was trying to shoot into the muzzle. I have never known. But we took a second round, which killed him. And I scrambled back out of that place and dropped into a little hole, 10 or 15 yards on back on the hill.
And?
Well, that's where I was when, I don't know how much later I was not hearing.
Were you unconscious or just stunned?
I think I drifted in and out because more time passed when I finally looked at my watch than I had realized, and but I was stunned, yes. And then I felt this poking on the back side of my left shoulder, and I thought it was one of our people, of course. I turned around, and instead it was a German soldier with what we called a burp gun, a Schmeisser, I believe it's the correct name for a machine pistol. And he let me know I'm supposed to come out.
What'd he say?
Well, the best I could hear, he was speaking English at that point. He said, "For you, the war is over." Yes, he said that directly to me.
For you, the war is over.
Yeah. Bad feeling.
He could have killed you, couldn't he? He could have shot you.
Oh, very easily. And I've often told myself that probably, had I been in his spot and he in mine, I probably would have done away with him.
Today's your birthday. How old are you today?
68.
You sometimes realize you're lucky to be...
Oh, yes. Every day since that German didn't just take care of me where I was, I've thought I've lived on borrowed time. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's been a blessing in many, many ways. I have thought that because of that, I've been able, a little bit better than most maybe, who haven't gone through that, to decide what's really important. I don't get disturbed easily at little frets. And then I feel that I owe something still.
To who?
Well, the good Lord. And people around me.
Family. Is there a part of your experience that you just couldn't share with your family?
Yes.
Do you just not talk about them?
No.
Met him, and Harold had the longbowmen. They were all on foot.
In 1066, William the Conqueror crossed the Channel from France to England, where he fought and won a bloody battle with the Anglo-Saxons.
Quite an advantage.
To commemorate his conquest, the story was set down in the Bayeux Tapestries, a record of war as it was fought nearly 1,000 years ago.
Is that a guy's head? Or is it
Yes, it is.
Well, anyway, he's to pieces.
Yeah, the border's got dead people all there.
Yeah.
You suppose those are vultures?
Yeah, that's got to be what that is. Sure is.
Yeah, must be. Well, they killed a bunch of folks in 1066.
I thought of you back at the Bayeux Tapestry because that tapestry is one of the most authentic depictions of war that has ever been drawn. Most of the news that goes home about war is not that detailed, of heads rolling and arms falling off, and whoever did the tapestry really was trying to give a graphic depiction of war. And I thought the only men who really know that about war are men like Morgan and Bennett, the doctors and the medics who saw all of that.
That tapestry is 900 years old. I mean, it depicts 1066, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing it ever since, haven't we?
What did you think when you saw it?
The tapestry. Just how endless it is, how it's apparently a part of everybody's life. War and death and men fighting men.
The German cemetery near Pointe du Hoc. Here, in rows of 5, lie the bodies of German soldiers killed in the battle for Normandy.
Renee, these are Germans buried here.
Well, I feel the same about them as I feel about our boys.
How's that? They were trying to kill you.
Yeah, but they were doing what they were told to do, just like we were. I never got angry. Not really angry.
I never had any great hate for the German soldier, even when I confronted him face to face during the course of the war. I wanted to get him out of the way. I didn't want him to be shooting at me, but actual hate, I don't think I felt that.
Did you hate the Germans? The German soldiers?
When you're a soldier, you have to come to hate the enemy before you can kill them, or you can eliminate your enemy.
Did you think of them as another man over there, or did you think of the cause they were fighting for?
Well, Americans, we were opposed to Nazism, and we were there to defeat the Nazis.
And these were Nazis?
As far as we're concerned, they're all Nazis when you're in the war, and they're trying, you know, when it's me or you.
I came to look upon the Germans really not as men, but as machines. They were as intent on killing me as I was them, and we had a mission. You do it. You ought to do the best you can to do it.
Did firing those shells at soldiers like these bother you then or now?
Nothing. Not then, not now.
Have any curiosity about that 18-year-old?
No, he was a faceless machine, as far as I was concerned.
There was no time in 1944 for the men to mourn the dead of either side. These now green fields were soaked with blood. But once the Allies broke out of the Normandy Peninsula, the Germans fell back. Now the road ran across the heart of France to the occupied city of Paris. Hitler had told his generals that Paris must not fall into the hands of the enemy except as a field of ruins. But the German army retreated, the city was spared, and the Allies entered Paris without a real fight. Soldiers like Robert Bennett of New York City, serving as a medic, marched into the liberated city to be greeted by thousands of frenzied Parisians.
In late summer of 1944 in Europe, the exhilaration of impending victory was in the air.
You remember how you were greeted the day you arrived in Paris?
Oh, they were excited that they were running up with champagne and with the flowers, the women as they climbed the board and tried to kiss you, and we weren't exactly pushing them away. No, we were caught up in the excitement of the whole thing.
Did you actually come under the Arc?
Yes.
Where did you and your fellow stay when you got to Paris?
We bivouacked there in the park.
In the park? Oh, you were in the park?
Right. And the funny incident was that, you know, the culture shock, so to speak. We were there, and the people, of course, were coming to visit us, and we felt more like people in the zoo, animals in the zoo, because, you know, even in our, shall we say, in the latrines, etc., they would enter and just stand there and watch. You know, this is a little too much for Americans.
They were really curious about
you.
And grateful.
Yeah, and grateful. Like the women, or a great number of the women, when they saw our men doing KP, volunteered, and, you know, just said, you know, made it known, and they helped. However, the colonel finally had to order up barbed wire barricades around our thing, not for the Germans, but to keep the people out.
The French people?
Yeah, because we couldn't do any of our normal working. And, however, I don't think it kept all the girls out, because I heard an awful lot of giggling in the pup tent. He says, the men must have been enjoying themselves. I said, well, they're happy to be here.
Today or very, very shortly. No, let's singing happy birthday, eh? Let's go. Happy birthday to you. All together. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Max. Happy birthday to very poor emphasis. Could have been louder there.
Today's the end of 73. I don't know how many.
73 for you.
I don't know how many more of them I can stand.
Coming up. Yeah, well, when I was...
Well, that may be part of the rationale for all this. Is
I suspect that's an element of it.
Right. So is mine.
I've discovered the older you get, the more you look into the past, and the more it comes to mean to you.
The Allied armies raced through Paris and across the French countryside toward Germany, pushing the enemy back toward the Rhine with extraordinary speed.
In all the liberated towns and villages, Yanks and French join in the celebration. Here's a French Betsy Ross.
In many a village, town, and city in France, Belgium, and Luxembourg, people cheered their liberators and then paused to say a prayer of gratitude.
Bonjour, M. Maldonado. Comment allez-vous? Je vous entendais.
Merci mille fois.
Toujours. Ah,
Welcome home. Thank you. Thank you for what you did. Thank you. Thank you for freedom. Thank you. Welcome home. Welcome home. Thank you for coming back. Thank you very much.
In late summer of 1944, many an American soldier dreamed of spending Christmas at home. Yet, that was not to be, for as it turned out, victory was a long way off.
As the Allies approached the German border, Hitler's armies stiffened their resistance. The Hurtgen Forest became a bloody, fruitless battle. When it was over, more than 24,000 Americans were missing, captured, wounded, or killed.
But in a forest, artillery fire is doubly effective. The shells burst in the treetops and spray the shell fragments downward. A lot of the men in the forest learned not to fall flat as protection against artillery fire, but to jam themselves up against a tree trunk. It doubled the casualty rate from artillery fire because it was forest. Now, Al's division incurred more than 4,000 casualties.
Al Bussell lives in Southern California. He was in the Hurtgen Forest as the trees exploded.
You remember those tree bursts? Oh, yeah. Once you experience those, I don't think, it's very vivid in your mind for even yet. After those tree bursts, some of them were, right overhead. Even though you were in a foxhole and covered over with logs, you'd wiggle your feet and be sure you were still all in one piece.
That's where you got captured?
Yeah. Just after dark on December the 2nd, the Germans moved in what we thought was a patrol, a small patrol, in an open field like this right next to where we were. We'd reached the edge of the forest and was looking down on a little town called Gay, G-E-Y, Gay. They were close enough and they stayed out there all night. We could hear them talking all night long. There were only 5 of us in our position. We realized we were in a bad situation. We decided we would attack them just before dawn. We thought it was a small patrol. We attacked them. They immediately counterattacked us back. They held us down with those machine pistol fire, and to where we couldn't get up. They destroyed our water-cooled machine gun. Evidently, they were laying right alongside of us on the other side of some concrete, and they were pitching hand grenades over on us. And our sergeant said we should surrender.
What'd you do?
Well, he called out to the Germans. They ordered us to come out with the hands up. We had to leave our weapons. We had to walk out, and these Germans, there was about 15 or more of them immediately in our immediate area. That's the most humiliating experience. Well, to have to lay down your arms, walk out to the mercy of your enemy.
With your hands up?
Hands up.
You think if you hadn't surrendered, you would have been killed?
Well, there was no way out.
There is A. Rupp, B. Murphy, A. Stabulus, A. Lucas, W. Moore. There were about 75, as I remember.
Even 45 years later, it's hard to believe.
At a road junction near the town of Malmedy, the SS troopers herded unarmed American prisoners into a field and mowed them down with machine gun fire. In the American lines, word of the massacre soon spread to a vengeful GI.
It was a massacre. It wasn't only that they were machine gunned down. It was that Germans came later with pistols and kicked them in the crotch or in the head to see if they were alive, and if they showed the slightest signs of life, put a bullet through their heads. I mean, this was clear, unadulterated murder.
It's reasonable to expect that if you surrender, you're not subject to being killed. But these men had no choice in the matter. They were captives, and the Germans used rifles and handguns and just killed them in cold blood. It just wasn't fair.
In my case, a little different. Mine was a one-on-one thing. As you say, you're not in a very dignified situation, but I know one thing I've wondered since. I work in a financial institution, and I've always thought if somebody came in to rob it and should point a pistol at me, I wonder if I wouldn't fly apart and do something really foolish, because I never again want anybody to point a gun at me, which of course happens frequently when you're a prisoner of war. You've got somebody pointing a gun at you, and that is a bad feeling. You just don't want that to happen.
It's a pretty humiliating experience.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely. Yeah.
The Wasik Country, the sacred road. We will soon be turning off the auto route onto the Wasik Train, which leads us in the Verdun and onto the battlefield.
What was your standard daily ration? I mean, what could you think you could count on in your situation?
Well, you know, about all I ever saw was every day we got a dip out of the grass soup.
We thought it was cabbage. Maybe it was some kind of grass.
Well, sometimes there was stuff moving around in our soup, but
Lordy. Well, I did a survey once when we were at our hungriest, and I think I was hated for it at the time, but I said, if you could have one dish, one type of food to eat, what would you choose? Steak? What? And you know what came out ahead of anything?
I'm gonna guess bread.
Well, it was pancakes. Yeah. Pancakes with a lot of butter. This was wintertime. Pancakes with a lot of butter and syrup. I thought I would make use of that commercially after I got home, and I wrote the Aunt Jemima people, and I said, hey, I've got a thing you can use in advertising, They wrote back and said, thanks. Oh.
In one day, the enemy smashed through the defenses of the American First Army on a 45-mile front and was biting deep into Luxembourg and Belgium. In 24 hours, the initiative changed hands, and the German army, which had put the word blitzkrieg into all languages, unleashed its desperate offensive.
With his armies in retreat, Hitler made one last desperate gamble to split the Allies on the Western Front. the Battle of the Bulge would become the largest pitched battle ever fought by American arms.
And when did you see your first action?
In the Battle of the Bulge, just after Christmas of '44.
What do you remember about it?
Well, the biggest thing I remember is walking in through the snow and slush and seeing the 11th Armored going the other way. I wondered why we were walking in and the tanks were going the other way, and we very soon found out why they were going the other way.
And the answer was?
Tiger tanks were on their tail. In the Battle of the Bulge, for 3 days we lost 1,000 men a day. We lost half of the men who were in combat.
Those were dark hours, weren't they?
Very dark, yeah.
Dr. Loren Morgan of Wyoming went straight from medical school into the Army.
What was your job?
I was a battalion surgeon. That is the first doctor that any wounded man sees. So you're involved in taking care of people that are severely wounded, and you're all there is. You see, you're the only one there, and you're the only one that can take care of them. And that, of course, is terrifying, and the responsibility is unbelievable.
So everybody who could would be brought to you first.
Right.
You saw the worst.
We saw and we were the first ones to see him. Okay, my aid station was someplace.
We had to look for it, but Dr. Morgan wanted his son Dan and me to see his old aid station in a small town close to the German border.
There's the building, right there. We had the aid station on this side, back in here. The Fire Direction Center was behind it, back in that little tiny building back there. We entered through this door. I don't remember this door, but you can see where it's been built on. The top was all gone when we were there.
This is all blown off?
Yeah. And this was our first time we were under fire, right here. The top was blown off, and the shells were coming in. The 88s were coming in all over the place, and the tanks were just a mile up the road.
So was this the first place you treated wounded?
Significantly wounded, yeah. And
what happened to a man who was hit by one of those shells, or who was near one of those shells?
Completely disintegrated if he was hit within a few yards of him. And these are what missing in action means. It means there's not enough to find to bury, really.
What do you remember most vividly from the few days you were here?
We were here 3 days. And one day when it was quiet, we were walking around out there, and we found a house where the whole front of the house was gone. And there was a dining room table was set. The whole family was sitting around the dining room table, the little kids and Mom and Dad. Food was still on the table. Of course, the temperature was about 10 degrees, so everything was frozen. There was a lady in the corner with a broom, holding a broom, and they were all dead. They were all in position, and it looked like a wax museum. And a German shell had landed in front, and the concussion had just asphyxiated them, so to speak, sucked the air out of their lungs, and they were frozen in position. The whole family was there.
You remember that all these years, haven't you?
Yeah, I kind of kept it a secret until I told my wife only until a month ago we had our division reunion in Valley Forge, and my sergeant came up without any prompting at all. Said, "Do you remember that house with those people that were blown up in it?" So I'm not afraid to tell the story now.
Why were you reluctant to tell it all those years?
I didn't know whether I had really remembered it or not. You know, you can create quite a bit of fiction if you aren't careful. And it was so unreal. I mean, it looked like a wax museum.
You might have thought you were daydreaming.
It was a horrible sight, yeah.
The German counterattack had caught the Allies completely off guard. For weeks, the fighting was confused and desperate. The Americans dug foxholes into the frozen ground and tried to hang on.
How far away would they be spaced apart?
What's the foxholes?
Right.
Depending on each individual. He sort of had his own where he's going to dig in. A lot of this was individual stuff. There was no one else.
That's it. That makes for nice sleeping. Okay. Nice sleeping.
When we first came down, the order was to attack at dawn. But during the night, the orders changed to hold in place and defend to the last man, which is kind of a bromide. I wish the Army would forget they ever heard it. But with our small arms fire, we held off what I estimate to be about 6 or 7 German assaults up that hill. This went on for quite some time, and I was standing there and I saw a bunch of men come walking up the draw. It was my weapons platoon leader with the machine guns. And I ran out and said, "Scotty, what the hell are you all doing? We're supposed to hold." He said, "We don't have any more ammunition. What's the point?" Well, I agreed with him. So then's when I gave the order to the other platoons to fall back.
How old were you when you led men into that battle?
Bill, I had turned 22 3 weeks earlier.
Were you scared?
Up in some pillboxes, my first action, I was trembling. I was so scared. Here, I was too occupied to become scared. And at the end, I was, in a sense, desperate. I felt I had failed, that my company had failed. And I said to myself at one time, well, court-martial me, I don't give a rip. I didn't know, we didn't know what was against us, what had attacked us.
Why did you think you'd failed?
Because we had been told to hold to the last man, and we didn't. We collapsed.
But as it turned out,
thank goodness we did collapse. Probably no man in that company would have survived if we had not collapsed.
When you left the woods down there and came here, you must have been feeling pretty miserable.
I felt, as I said, that my company had failed, that I had failed. And then I bumped into my battalion commander in the farmhouse just off behind us here. And he said to me, "Nice work, Mac." And I couldn't believe it. And he said, "You held far longer than I thought you could hold after I found out what was hitting you." And I must confess, I broke down and cried a little bit.
With relief?
With relief, yes.
Where did you receive the Silver Star?
It was for that action in the forest.
Right back down here?
Right back down there.
And what happened?
Well, I was given it for my running the company there and handling the company the way I did under the circumstances, under attack by very superior forces, without tank support, without only minimum artillery support. And I was running around making sure the platoons were right and this, that, thing, and the other. So somebody decided I was deserving of it. I don't know that I was.
There was a moment when the fortunes of war led you together with another man who's on this trip, Jose Lopez. You met right down there.
Jose was attached to the company on my right. These heavy machine gunners are always attached to some other company. We all fell back to a smaller wood, and there was some foxholes there. And I jumped in the first foxhole, and the first thing I knew, this man Lopez had set up his machine gun on the rim of the foxhole behind me, 5 feet away, and was firing over my head. And then we were all given, somebody yelled, we're all falling back further. So I had to say, "Lopez, for God's sake, stop firing that machine gun so I can get out of this hole." And Lopez did, and I got out of the hole.
Now the woods came right out to here. Those woods in those days came right out to here.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it was trees in here.
Trees?
Yeah, but right there where the cow is, I don't have nothing ahead of me.
You could see right back there?
Yeah, like that was the best spot I picked up.
And the Germans came from?
They was coming that direction. Their way, right there.
This is the citation you got when you received the Congressional Medal of Honor. Let me read what it says and see if it brings back some of the memories. On his own initiative, Lopez carried his heavy machine gun from Company K's right flank to its left in order to protect that flank, which was in danger of being overrun by advancing enemy infantry supported by tanks.
Right.
Occupying a shallow hole, offering no protection above his waist, he cut down a group of 10 Germans. Ignoring enemy fire from an advancing tank, he held his position and cut down 25 more enemy infantry attempting to turn his flank. Glancing to his right, he saw a large number of infantry swarming in from the front.
Blown over backward by the concussion of enemy fire. Where did that happen?
That was in the same area right here.
Right here.
Yeah.
Lopez immediately reset his gun and continued his fire. Single-handed, he held off the German horde until he was satisfied his company had effected its retirement. Again, he loaded his gun on his back, and in a hail of small arms fire, he ran to a point where a few of his comrades were attempting to set up another defense against the onrushing enemy. He fired from this position until his ammunition was exhausted. Still carrying his gun, he fell back with this small group to Crinkle, the village back there.
Right.
Sergeant Lopez's gallantry on seemingly suicidal missions in which he killed at least 100 of the enemy were almost solely responsible for allowing Company K to avoid being enveloped and to withdraw successfully, and to give other forces coming up in support time to build a line which repelled the enemy drive.
All I remember after no more rounds, and just carried my gun and I just walked, and I could whistle the bullets behind my back, and I care less. I just want to get up there to meet the rest of my unit.
Do you think of yourself as a brave man?
Well, all I could say that I believe any man would do the same thing. Anybody.
Could you get a picture of you and Charles, okay?
Oh, Charles.
Yeah, right over here.
Two of us. These are the two defenders of Company I and Company K, 23rd Infantry. And Jose's company was right to the right of my company. Oh.
American reinforcements were on the way to bolster the northern defense.
See, when we went into combat, I jumped right next to the colonel. The colonel went out the door first, and I went next.
The doctor goes second?
I do.
You did by choice?
Yeah, the colonel said you'll jump second.
That was a choice.
That was a choice. But, you know, that's as good a place as any.
What was it like falling through that space?
In combat, we jumped at 300 feet, so it was just open bang, you were on the floor.
With all of your equipment?
Yeah, I weighed 300 pounds coming out the door of the airplane.
300 pounds?
I weighed 180, and I had 120 pounds of equipment on me.
You remember what was going through your mind?
Just wanted to get on the ground as quickly as possible.
Once the German counterattack was thrown back, the Allies seemed to have the enemy beaten. But still, Hitler wouldn't quit. There was fighting all through the grim and icy winter.
In January, in the snow in Luxembourg, we entered a holding position. That was the 3rd Army, Patton's Army, and all we did was patrol for a while in the snow. And then the night before the big attack, my company commander said, "Randall, you are designated as liaison officer between battalion and regiment." This probably saved my life, since in the next 4 days, 6 of my men were killed, and the platoon sergeant, which would have been in my same place, was wounded with white phosphorus.
Howard Randall lives in central Texas, near Austin. He served in Patton's 3rd Army.
I was a 2nd lieutenant. This means you have 40 men that are dependent upon you for their lives, and they treat you as their father, and here you're 22 years old and can't possibly be that smart. This was my first introduction to real fear. I was given the mission to take a few men and reconnoiter a small dirt road, only about a half-mile long, and determine if it had anti-personnel or anti-tank mines, or if it had tripwires. And this was under a foot of snow, and it was down right next to the river, the Sour River, and in open country. The trees stopped about a half a mile upslope. And when I got this news from the Battalion S2, the intelligence officer, I said, but don't we have engineers to do this kind of thing? And he said, we have engineers, but they aren't doing this kind of thing. They're on some other mission. And then I said, don't you have mine detectors that I can take down there? He said, yeah, we have mine detectors. They're out on another patrol. He said, Lieutenant, there are 5 snowsuits in the corner. You take those and go. So I had 4 men and myself, and I threw the snowsuits to them. And I tried to orient them on this, thinking this is the worst situation I could think of. And the panic mounted in me. It was below freezing. My teeth were chattering so badly I could not orient them properly.
You couldn't talk, you mean?
I couldn't talk. I finally resorted to the infantry motto, which is follow me. I could say those 2 things. And then we walked through the woods, following a road for about a half a mile, and came to the end of the tree line. And then you could look out and see this completely untrammeled snow, a small rural road. You could see a depression in the snow to show where the road was. Not a mark on it, and it led right down to the river. And you look up. This wasn't a moonlit night, but the snow gave enough light. You look up 450 feet high was the escarpment, which contained all the pillboxes in our zone on the Siegfried line.
German pillboxes?
Yeah, these were manned and ready to go. And I thought, my God, when we step out in this snow, we're going to be visible, we're going to be moving, and immediately a magnesium flare will go up, the parachute flare, and they stay up there a long time. And then naturally you get machine gunned. This is always the sequence. And I was so scared, I really didn't know what to do, and I really didn't know how to find these mines. I knew this was an important information because a battalion was going down this road in a few nights carrying assault boats to hit the river. So I really gulped hard and tried to conquer this fear, told all the men to get behind the trees, and I just jumped out in the road. And I didn't blow up, and I was pretty pleased about that. And then I just thought, well, I'll just keep going. So I walked another about 50 yards in the snow and motioned for the next guy, thinking he probably won't come out. But he did, and that gratified me immensely. And we all went down with this big interval between us in case of one of us set off a mine. And, well, to make it shorter, we trampled the heck out of all that snow and got back to the tree line. And by that time, we were so relieved and happy that we were throwing snowballs at each other, and when we went back through our own outpost lines, we completely forgot the password and almost got shot doing that. I went back and reported this, that there were no mines to the Battalion S2, and he said, good information, Randall. And then I turned to leave, brushing aside the blackout blankets that hung at every CP, and he said, hey, Randall, how did you determine there weren't any mines in that road? And I said, we trampled the hell out of every square foot of snow in your goddamn road. And that was the end.
Before you went into combat, did you have any doubts about how you would behave under fire?
Oh, yeah, I had grave doubts. A number of us came to the conclusion that we would do our darndest to avoid any cowardly act because we felt we'd have to live with that the rest of our lives, if we lived. Of course, at that time, after we'd been through a few scrapes, we were fairly sure we were going to be wounded or killed, and maybe it didn't matter so much, but I sure thought of it a lot, and I was able to conquer the fear, but it was almost overwhelming. It was a close call.
That's that kind of anonymous heroism that we read about. But what did you learn about courage? What did you learn about heroism at the ground level?
To this extent, heroism seems to be a kind of an individual thing. I saw men in artillery barrages that were crying, pounding the ground so they were flat on their stomach, and screaming, and an artillery barrage like that didn't bother me at all. I didn't even think about it. I thought, why are these guys behaving like this? Yet they were brave men, and they could go on a night patrol that would, it would affect me terribly. So a man can be brave. One man can be brave in a certain situation, another can't, and you just don't know till you're in it.
Okay, all aboard, please. Climb up. Today's our busy day.
to the bulge. Well, you know what the weather was like. This was in December 44, right?
Yeah, December 16th when it started.
And it was cold.
Yeah, I remember.
It was cold. One thing I remember, one Sunday, we went to church. They even, the chaplain even had mass while the artillery was falling.
That was right near Christmas, probably.
Right, Christmas Day.
How many months were you actually in the fighting?
It started in October.
Rene Marcial lives in Southern California. He's never been back to this small town on the German border since he saw his first action there.
The end of the war.
Yes, sir.
What's the experience of fear?
Oh, you tighten up. You tighten up. Sometimes you heave. You shake a lot. Oh, yes, you shake a lot. You get hugged the ground, you know, as if the ground was going to protect you. That's about it. But it stays with you, especially under fire, of course. Once the fire ceases, you can relax.
Rene, how did you get the Bronze Star?
We went into combat. We got a mortar barrage. We get them all the time. They'd stop and they'd start. But anyway, this morning, it was very close. I was in front of the hedge, and I knew it was close. I was about 20 feet away. And they got a direct hit in that box, in that mortar place.
Your men?
That gun. So this, I knew it was close, but I didn't dare come out of my hole. And this fella kept calling to me.
He was wounded?
Yes, he was hurt. He said, I'm hurt.
What was he saying?
Well, something like, help me or something. Help me, you know. So the only way I could get to him was to be run down about 25 yards where the opening to this hedgerow is, because you can't go through them. So I had to do that. I had to run down to the corner and run back to the gun, which was behind me at the time. And they got a direct hit. There was 3 men in the mortar pit. And the shell landed between the 2 that were sitting. And, of course, they were in pieces. And the one that happened to be laying, it was raining. Oh, buddy. He was laying in the front of the mortar, which was about 5 feet deep. And he was covered with a tarpaulin of some kind. That's when I got there. That's what I saw. He was still alive. So I pulled him out of there, and I guess I carried him to the edge row and handed him over to medics. And they took him away from that. That was the last I've seen of that man. But I guess he was cut up. His clothes were kind of cut up, you know. With an explosion, the clothes seemed to be cut up, sort of frayed.
The shrapnel goes in.
I guess.
And the other 2 were dead.
Yes, their heads were even gone.
Head?
Oh, yes.
What goes through your mind when you see 2 buddies like that?
I wish I could tell you. It's nearly impossible. That's impossible what you're thinking. When you have to go and help them, you know, when they're help. At least when he was calling to me, I had to go help him. I didn't have to go, but I did.
Can't forget him, though.
Oh, no. I don't even remember his name. Matheson from Texas. Matheson.
All these years later, you can see him in your mind?
Tall, skinny guy. Thin. That was 2 days in battle.
You were just in...
Just 2 days. We lost about 4 or 5 men that first 2 days. They were good buddies. I spent 3 years with them.
In training. And then they got it the first 2 days. A lot of Mathesons.
Yes, and cops.
Death on the battlefield is not the Hollywood neat hole that makes them fall and are quiet all of a sudden and go into a state of rest. Now it's grabbing faces and it's screaming and it's rolling on the ground. And I'll tell you, you prop somebody with a throat wound up against a hedgerow, and his last heartbeats
will squirt blood 4 feet out in streams. When you see things like that and worse, and you know you are being killed, you don't think a short second about whether you should be killing them or not.
If you don't kill those guys when you can, the next day you're going to meet them and they may kill you and they may kill your best buddy. So no matter how you feel about it, it's your duty to kill these men as fast and as many as you can.
And I think it was Patton who says our duty is not to die for our country.
Yes.
It's to make them die for theirs, and that's what we were about.
Standing guard on the German border were the Dragon's Teeth, the Siegfried Line, a network of guns, pillboxes, and underground bunkers.
When General Patton ordered your unit to attack the Germans from behind the Dragon's Teeth, what happened? What'd you do?
We were supposed to take this little town of Welch building. It was way down there, and it just jumped up and ran like hell toward this little town, at least 1,000 yards down a gentle, long slope. And God, the mortars started landing on us, and I was running as fast as I could, and I felt this hammer blow on my left ankle, and I turned a violent cartwheel, and I really went up in the air and came down on my helmet and shoulder, and I skidded a ways because this ground was soft and we were going downhill. And then my runner plops down beside me, and I said, look at that leg, because I don't want to, and tell me if it's there. And I was really scared because I couldn't feel a thing. And he said, well, it's all right, but you got a big piece of metal sticking out of your ankle. And I said, pull it out. And he didn't want to. I said, pull it out. We got to go. The mortar fire was increasing. We were going to die if we stayed there. I really didn't know what to do. I heard machine gun bullets and this mortar fire, and as I say, not a tree or a bush ahead of us for hundreds and hundreds of yards in that little town down there. And here's where I relied on the movies. I thought, I got to do something to get out of this and maybe inspire the men a little bit. And then I saw a corporal over there, and I said, Corporal, how's it over on the left? And he came back in a second and said, it's lousy over here. There's bullets coming in and breaking the clouds. And I said, Sergeant, how is it over to the right of this rise? He came back a little while and said, we aren't going that way. And I said, we're going straight over the top. You guys go first. And I meant it, because I didn't know they'd follow me if I went first. These guys weren't in my platoon. So they went, by God. They jumped up and ran like hell, and I jumped up third man, and pretty soon we got this whole mess going again.
You were hit. You had fragments in your ankle?
Yeah, the ankle was pretty badly hit. I couldn't feel a thing with my leg, and I was kind of dog-trotting after a while.
I couldn't walk anymore.
Yeah.
And I had to be helped down off the hill.
What is it, over in that way?
Yeah, 3 more after this big space.
Edward J. Myers, First Lieutenant, 417th Infantry, 76th Division.
He's from the state of Washington, Puyallup, Washington, March 1, 1945. That was the same day I was wounded. He was behind me probably 100 yards, maybe 200 yards, and he caught a piece of mortar fragment in the stomach. Lived until that night. I didn't know he had died until a couple of days later.
Were you close?
We were good buddies. He was very brave, and his men liked him because he took care of them probably better than any other officer and his men in the company.
What do you mean he took care of them?
He played father better than the rest of us.
How old was he?
He was younger than I. He was 21. But he made first lieutenant, and I was still a second lieutenant. Hence, he was my company commander on this day. When we got through with the action on that day, and in the middle of the night, I learned I had a new company commander. I didn't know him well. I'd seen him once. And then I didn't get to think about Eddie very much because my wound hurt. I was exhausted, We bedded down in a house, and later that night we had to capture the high ground outside of Welshbillig. And the next day was full of combat, and we killed a lot of Germans with artillery. Then I quit. I couldn't walk anymore very well, and I had to be helped down off the hill. And I learned when I hit the battalion aid station that gangrene had set in. I'd waited too long. Then my captain surgeon took a look at it as I was on the gurney and said, "Randall, we may have to amputate your foot." And that's when I sat up and pleaded very eloquently. And the lieutenants around me applauded. I pleaded so eloquently. In fact, I shouted and swore a little bit.
What did you say?
And I said, "God damn it, don't cut that foot off. It's all right. I can walk on it still, even though it hurts like hell." And he said, "Well, we'll let it go for a while and try massive doses of penicillin." And that, it worked to an extent. A week later, it burst out its sutures, and he sewed up again. Another week later, it burst again, and he said, "To hell with it," pulled all the sutures out and said, "You're gonna have one bad, ugly scar." And I says, "Who cares?" And it's okay now. So that's about it.
When did you find out about Eddie?
When I came off the hill with a sergeant helping me off the hill and back to the battalion CP, one private walked up and said he was dead.
Well,
but it helps when you're hurting yourself and are exhausted. You don't really, I didn't show as much emotion right then as I do right now. And I guess that's a lesson. The war changed my self-perception. When I got out of it, I realized that I didn't have to do any of this macho posturing that I had done as a teenager and a young man. You're always showing off and...
no flexing of muscles.
Yeah. And God, you can't get much more Rambo than running at the enemy, shooting your gun as fast as you can. And so I didn't feel the need to prove myself much after that. And if somebody said, "Hey, you're afraid to do this," and I'd say, "Yeah, you're right, I'm afraid to do this," I wouldn't mind admitting chicken at all. It's just that at least at one time, one day, I was fairly brave, and that helped a lot.
Yeah.
In combat, it seemed pretty obvious after the first major encounter and the men come back to a rest area, nothing petty arises. There are no arguments.
Sure.
The guys like each other much more than they ever did before. They have a common bond of existing together under terrible hardship. And everything petty just kind of goes out the window.
You're stripped to the essentials, and when you are, that gives you a pretty good sense of balance in living.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
All decisions in later life are viewed in the perspective of your early experience in the war, and I wasn't afraid to just make a major decision involving money or stuff, because I'd say to myself, hell, if I lose it, I'm still alive and nobody's shooting at me.
Life is pretty short, after all.
Grab it and run.
Yeah, go for it. And that's, and also, I think I feel full well the biblical statement, "This is the day that the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it."
Mm-hmm.
And that's very meaningful.
Frankly, I became a little more religious out on that battlefield than I ever was before also.
Not so self-sufficient as we all thought
at that age of the early 20s, yeah.
When these men crossed the Rhine River in 1945, there was more fighting to be done. Today, there is just the end of a tour and time to be alone, time to remember. When they came home from the war, I was just a boy and eager to know what it had been like over there. But even good friends like Max Lale from my hometown in Texas rarely talked about the fighting and bravery and fear, or what the war had meant to them. They just seemed to want to go about their business. I used to wonder how they could put behind them the memories of war. Now I understand they never did and never can.
That was 5 years ago. The men you met in the film are all still alive, except for Charles McDonnell. He died in December 1990 at the age of 68. He was a shy man who didn't want to talk about his Silver Star or the Purple Heart he received for wounds suffered in battle. But his book, Company Commander, has sold over 1 million copies and is still read at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. This is the newest book I've read about the Normandy invasion. It's titled D-Day, June 6, 1944, The Climactic Battle of World War II. And its author, Stephen Ambrose, has joined me now. Dr. Ambrose has almost 24 books to his credit, including the definitive biography of President Eisenhower, biography of Richard Nixon, and many about World War II. Stephen Ambrose is president of the National D-Day Museum in New Orleans. Those men we just saw in this film, and all the men like them, living and dead, were my heroes, are my heroes. They fought my battle, they won my war. They were the kind of human being I wish I might have been if I had been in their place.
That's very exactly said, and absolutely. And what stands out about these men, to me, they're just giants. They were at the time, obviously. They still are.
18, 19, 21-year-old giants.
That's right. They're born into that false prosperity of the 1920s. Grew up with the bitter realities of the Depression. They didn't want to have another war. They knew what their fathers or their uncles had been through in 1917, 1918. They didn't want any part of another war. They wanted to be shooting 22s at rabbits, not M1s at other young men. They wanted to be throwing baseballs, not hand grenades. But there was an evil force loose in the world, and somebody had to do something about it, and it fell to them. Some of them volunteered, some of them were called up through conscription. Nevertheless, it fell to them, became their responsibility. They went out, and they met it, and they did it magnificently.
Why did these old veterans go back?
I think they go back to recapture a moment in their lives that is very precious to them, and obviously so, and unique to them. A time when they speak to it in your D-Day to the Rhine program, a time when they had the best friends they'll ever have in their life. Now, what stands out about this to me is a kid from Minnesota will end up in a squad with a kid from Florida with another kid from New York. They have nothing in common. They never would have met in civilian life. These guys come together from all over the United States. They're thrown into their squads. They sleep in the same barracks. They have the same SOB as a company commander, and they have the same man to hate then. And they come together around that. They sleep in the field together. They ship over together. They get drunk in England together. They go through the training in England together, and they have this love for each other, the kind of love that men can bring about and experience with each other. Doesn't happen in civilian life. You've got to be in that life-threatening kind of a situation that the GIs were in World War II for it to really blossom. And when they went ashore, what there was in their mind was not the Stars and Stripes, and it wasn't fighting for democracy over fascism. It was Joe over here and Harry over here is counting on me, and I'll do anything for those guys, and I'm not going to let them down. I've had so many D-Day veterans, when I ask them what kind of prayer went through your mind if you were in a C-47 or going over the channel, or you were in a Higgins boat crossing the channel, The prayer was, "Dear God, don't let me let my buddies down."
You write in your book on D-Day that there were very serious doubts in the spring of 1944 that America in particular and democracy in general could actually produce young men like these who could go up against Hitler's Nazi soldiers.
That's right. And the person who doubted it the most was Adolf Hitler. Hitler bet that kids brought up as Nazi youth would always prevail over kids brought up as Boy Scouts. Hitler thought that the toughness that comes out of the totalitarian fanaticism and the Führer principle of unquestioned obedience, right from the very top all the way down to the bottom, they would always prevail over the softness of kids brought up in a democracy with their emphasis on individual rights and human liberties that Hitler said on the eve of the invasion, "Let them come." He was certain, absolutely certain, that his men would throw the Americans back. And in fact, what happened was that the Boy Scouts beat the hell out of the Nazi youth. It turned out that democracies produce better armies than the totalitarian state can.
What was it that removed the doubts and transformed these young rabbit hunters into
precisely that they've been brought up in a democracy? Max Taylor used to speak about
General
this.
Taylor.
Yeah, very effectively.
Commander of the 101st
101st Airborne.
Yeah.
He said the ability of the junior officers and the non-coms in the American Army to take the initiative, the precise opposite of what Hitler thought. Hitler thought the Führer principle, unquestioning obedience, that's the way you make the best kind of an army. In fact, on D-Day, at Utah Beach, at Omaha Beach, the situation in both cases was nothing like what they had been briefed to expect.
Worse than that?
Way worse, way worse. And on those beaches, it was junior officers and non-coms who said, look, the plan is kaput. We got to take command here. They sized up the situation. They seized the initiative. They took their opportunity. They accepted the responsibility. They said, follow me. And they led them up that bluff at Omaha or into that inundated area behind Utah Beach in a way that German officers were not capable of. German officers on D-Day sat and waited for orders. Colonel von der Heide, who commanded the parachute regiment in the Cotentin Peninsula, spent the morning trying to get through to General Marks on the telephone back in St. Louis to ask him, what do I do? Here's the situation. He knew what he wanted to do, but he couldn't do it without orders. So that willingness to take an initiative is what distinguished the American soldier from the German soldier in World War II and made him a better soldier.
What was at stake at D-Day?
The 20th century and what follows. You got to remember, in 1939, it looked like democracy was done for. The question in 1939 as to what system is going to prevail in this world was, is it going to be communism or is it going to be fascism? American democracy was on its back. We still had 30% unemployed in this country. We had no armed forces. England was sleeping. France, the other great democracy, was falling apart, and the next year, 1940, did fall apart, unable to meet the onslaught of Hitler. 1941, when Hitler attacked the Soviet Union, you look at the world situation in 1941, and your question is it going to be communism or is it going to be fascism that's going to win? What happened on D-Day was that the democracies made their fury manifest, that they pulled themselves together between 1941 and 1944. In this country, it was just miraculous. We went from making 80 military aircraft in 1939 to producing 96,000 in 1944. We had no landing craft in 1941. In 1941, our Army numbered 176,000 men. That made it 16th in the world, right behind Romania. In 1941, in the Louisiana maneuvers, we didn't have any tanks. Hitler that summer invaded the Soviet Union with 30,000 tanks. In the Louisiana maneuver, they painted the word tank on the side of trucks. 3 years later, the democracies had gotten themselves together. Ike used to talk about the fury of an aroused democracy. And that happened. And we hurled in one day an army bigger than existed in the United States in 1941, magnificently equipped and beautifully trained and ready to take on the Wehrmacht and defeat it on its home grounds, and did. It's a triumph of democracy over totalitarianism.
How close did the invasion come to failing?
About that close. You know, on Omaha Beach at mid-morning, Bradley was about to withdraw the troops. Now,
Why?
Because they were pinned down at the seawall. They were just taking a murderous fire from the Germans. They were suffering, the first wave suffered 90% casualties. And the Germans had an inexhaustible supply of ammunition, and they were shooting these guys like ducks in a barrel. And nothing in the plan had worked. The plan had been that the B-17s are going to destroy all those beach defenses, but the B-17s delayed their drop for a fatal second and 2 seconds, and so all their bombs dropped a kilometer or more inland. The naval bombardment was too short and too long. It went over the top of the bluff. The troops had been briefed, when you guys hit that beach, there ain't going to be anything alive on that beach. There's going to be nothing alive on that bluff. It's all going to be wiped out. You're going to go up the bluff behind these swimming tanks, DD tanks they were called, duplex drive. And these tanks were going to come in and lead the way up the ravines to the top of that bluff. And the GIs were told going in, your problems are going to begin when you get to the top of the bluff. Well, when the ramps went down, they just took this horrendous fire. It just wiped out whole boatloads immediately. Of the 35 DD tanks that were launched, 32 sank. Only 3 got ashore. So you had these GIs huddled at that seawall, taking mortar fire that was very effective because the Germans had pre-sighted all this stuff in. 75s and 88s and 155s pouring in on them, machine gun fire coming in on them. They were pinned down, they were helpless, they were disorganized, they were leaderless, they had lost their unit cohesion, they were scared, they were exhausted. And it was at this moment that those Boy Scouts, the kids who had made Eagle Scout and who were now second lieutenants or sergeants, looked at the situation and they said, we can't retreat. The plan is gone. Forget about it, we're not getting up those draws. Let's take some of them with us at the minimum. Let's go, follow me. I like to say that D-Day was the moment in which the United States went from being one of the world powers to being a superpower. The amount of material that we were able to put in, the production miracle that had taken place in the United States. But beyond that, these young American kids taking charge.
You've stood on those beaches. You've climbed those cliffs. You've walked among the hedgerows where the fighting was truly murderous. What went through your mind?
Admiration and appreciation and a certain sense of joy. A joy at being an American and knowing that our country produces, and I think still very much so today, these young men who will take responsibility when it's thrust upon them and act on it and make an ultimate sacrifice if that's necessary to keep freedom alive in this world.
Thank you, Stephen Ambrose. His book is D-Day, June 6, 1944, The Climactic Battle of World War II. I'm Bill Moyers. Thank you for joining us.
Major funding for this program was provided by Mutual of America, building America's future through pension and retirement programs, encouraging dialogue and discussion. The spirit of America, Mutual of America. Funding was also provided by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Schumann Foundation, and by the financial support of viewers like you. For a video cassette of this program, call 1-800-345-1352 or send $39.95 to the address on your screen.
This is PBS.
Bill Moyer's programming is brought to you locally by Baxter's Books, your personal bookstore in downtown Minneapolis. The national law firm of Doherty, Rumble & Butler, a results-oriented firm committed to client satisfaction for 135 years. D.C. Hay, providing copiers, facsimile systems, and business results since 1946. Luthold & Anderson, investment portfolio management, innovative while conservative. Mr. Christopher Carley, representing affiliated insurance brokerage, professional liability and business insurance consultants. And by Lakewood Cemetery, serving the Twin Cities for more than 100 years, celebrating life.
On the next National Geographic special.
From the decks of the world's greatest superliner, it's D-Day Remembered, a musical tribute from the Q.
Get out while you can. You've done enough. Too much, if you ask me.
Well, you never know, Hugh. There's always a slim chance. Go and see Marge. Daily visits. Then we see.
A friend from the past. Hope for the future. A perfect hero on Masterpiece Theater.
During the Second World War, the tiny French village of Le Chambon sheltered over 5,000 Jews from the Nazis. Despite ever-present danger, the villagers did not turn away, nor did they betray a single Jew. The people of Le Chambon united together in a conspiracy of goodness, a conspiracy against evil. In Weapons of the Spirit, Pierre Sauvage, one of the Jews saved by the villagers, returns to chronicle the selflessness and the courage of Le Chambon. As one villager recounts, even the most ordinary people can do great things, given the opportunity. Weapons of the Spirit, the story of man's capacity for good, hosted by Bill Moyers.
Monday night at 8, here on Channel 2. On the next National Geographic special, if you think you've seen Mexico, think again. There's more to this country than meets the eye. Take a closer look into the heart and soul of Mexico, its people. Reflections of the past and visions of the future create a shimmering mosaic that is the Mexicans through their eyes. A National Geographic special. Tonight at 8, here on Channel 2.